Okay, so CAD uses units. When you want to draw something, you define it by a measurement. And that measurement is performed by a measure from one side to the other, which is the x-axis, the measurement from top to bottom, which is the y-axis, and because we're in 3D, we need a z-axis. It's actually pointing out towards us, and that would be the height of the object. Now, CAD can be selected as millimeters or lots of other dimensions or inches, etc. But it's just easier because we're going to print out in small units to work in millimeters. However, that means that large objects would end up with 3 or 4 digits being the dimensions, which would get complicated. So I prefer to work in inches because there's not many of them makes up an object like the tallness of a man is less than 100, so it's only 2 digits. And I convert it later into the smaller scale of millimeters by a factor. So what we could do is work in direct units, as in millimeters. So if I wanted to draw a cube, let's say, I would select the cube tool and I would type in the dimensions that I want, which is a 1 foot square block. So that's 304.8. I then put in a comma, which, because I've selected the X dimension, now I'm going to select the Y dimension. So again, I put in 304.8, and then I need to specify the Z axis dimension, the height, which again is a comma. So now it moves on to the Z, and we put in 304.8. And we end up with a cube. And that cube is essentially a foot square, or 304.8 millimeters square. Complicated, isn't it? So I could scale that to be able to print it by selecting the scaling tool, select the object, and a point to scale it on, and I can make it bigger or I can make it smaller by any factor that I want. So in our case, our factor is a 76th to get from real world scale to 00 scale. So that is a very large, complicated number that I don't really want to have to type in each time. So the easiest option is, luckily, AutoCAD has a handy function whereby it'll accept an actual fraction. So we put in 1/76 down here, press return, and whoosh, it disappears. Yeah, tiny little cube. And if we actually measure that, you can see that it is 4 millimeters. It's slightly out because the whole scale is very slightly out, but it's near enough. It's 4 mil. So I could, if I wanted to, move that somewhere where I can easily find it. So I have a little grid pre-printed out and plonk it on there, and that is effectively the area of the printer. So as you can see, it fits on the printer, unlike the big block that was over here, which was real world scale. But I prefer to design in inches because it's a lot easier. So if I go to this square and I get it so we can see it, and I now make a little block, but I type in 12 by 12 by 12, we make a much simpler little block. And then what I can do is I can reduce that in size. I won't go into the maths, but very simply, if I now reduce that by a factor of 0.33333 recurring, 4 of them will do, and I now move that to my print area, you will see that it does exactly the same thing. And it's a lot easier to draw the cube as 12 by 12 by 12 than all those big millimeters. So if we go back to my design area, and I'll turn on some dimensions for you, this basically means that I can design something that's these dimensions in inches, which will then be able to go down to the real print size, which is 65 millimeters by 115 millimeters. So it's a bit confusing, but yes, they are real millimeters, as in what I can print to. And then over here is real inches in the real world size that I can fit into my print area. So if something was greater than 350 inches, then obviously I wouldn't be able to print it because it would be hanging off the plate once I reduced it down. I'll just delete these little, no, I'll leave them actually. What I do is I put something into the drawing when I open up my standardized template that helps me work out where I am. And what I do is I've got a little man and a little scale ruler, yeah, so that I can compare the size of the object that I'm working with what it's going to turn out like. And I've reduced him down by the same 1/3, and he's replicated at 1/3 in terms of the print area that I can print. So as you can see, I wouldn't get a full-size carriage or loco on the print bed. Yeah, but a little wheelbarrow would fit in there quite happily. And you can now see that my little block is precisely the right dimension to fit into the scale. So all the things that you see on the screen are actually built into layers. So I'll bring this in so you can see it off my second screen, and you can see here that I've defined names for different layers, which I can turn on and off, and I can lock them, and I can lock them but not display them, etc. The point is that I can select what I see on screen, so if something's in the way, it can be turned off temporarily and then turned back on later. So as an example, if I come to delete my little block, what happens is I've deleted my scale. Best to undo that. So what I can do is, if I just go off screen, is this item is on the scale guide and the base grid that I work to is on the print area. So what I can do is to lock them, and the print area is now locked, which means that it goes slightly faded to show me that it's locked, and I'll turn the lock on the scale guy. So he's slightly greyed out so that he's now, I can't delete him. So even though I can select him like this and I press delete, the scale, dimension and the block have disappeared, but he hasn't. So same here, I can cursor over all of this area, and although in theory I should have picked up the grid, if I now press delete, only the scale and the block disappear. So this is my normal environment that I work in, and you can see that the guy in the inches bit is the same thing. So I can select the scales that I put in temporarily, including his, but when I press delete, only that bit disappears. So now we have an environment that we can work from, which is easier to work with. So I can design something in here in standard real world inches, and then all I have to do is, when I'm done, is I reduce it in size, drop it in here as millimeters that are printable. And I can then export this bit to the printer file, which I'll show you later.